Okay. Okay, so let's do the gender pronoun thing. Uji, what's your gender pronoun? If you don't, okay. No preference. You, TG. Preference. Okay, that's quite an audience. Don't make noise, don't leave when people are speaking. There are 7 judges here. We have Josh, Connor, Amrit, Papuan, Vinod, Utara, and yours too. Without further ado, I invite the Prime Minister to start the debate. Yes.
Close the door. Close the door and then lock it. Don't lock it.
Do you want me to turn the timer up?
Whoever's the thing that goes deep.
Chair, let me first clear out the ways as to what I'm going to do in today's speech. First, I'm going to give you the status quo, the context as to what's happening in Papua. Second, I'm going to tell you why Papuan activists wanting for a separate agenda is more of an extreme way in which aftermath is going to lead for first, in case of failed state, not protecting their own people. Second, how the discrimination is going to get worse also for their own people too. And then also considering as to why in the comparative our side is going to be better off for their own citizens, since we have to care about the Papua people in the very end. Going to the first status quo in the context, we believe that the Papua situation is a very urgent situation in which we have to combat racial discrimination. However, in the status quo, what's happening is this is not happening. Why? Because the Indonesian government is cutting down the internet. They're not having more access to the information and whatnot. Therefore, the racial discrimination as to the government itself towards the indigenous people is happening. Therefore, we highly believe, and I think all of the sides will agree to the fact that we have to, we have to protect the indigenous people in the very end of the day. Then going on to our own instances as to why activists actually wanting for a separate agenda is an extreme way, which is in first analysis going to lead to a failed state. Why is this so? When we think about failed state, we think the meaning of itself is that it's a state in which the government does not have effective control of its territory, therefore it's not perceived as a legitimate by a significant portion of its population. It does not provide domestic security, the basic public services to its citizens, and therefore lacks a monopoly on the use of force. Also, when we think about failed states, I think we have to incorporate the political instability, what's going to happen afterwards if they actually do have independence, right? Under this situation, I'm going to argue that if they actually gain independence, in the best case, we're going to say that this is actually going to lead to a failed state. Why is this so? It's going to have political instability. When we take a look at the neighboring countries such as Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Island, or even East Timor, who actually gained independence, they went through, especially considering East Timor, they went through this very difficult transition for independence. What I mean by this was, there were violent clashes happening. 40% of the armed force were dismissed. The deployment of peacekeeping force was there. However, Prime Minister were forced to resign. The rebel soldiers broke into the president and the Prime Minister's house and whatnot. Therefore, as we can see, especially also in the context of East Timor or the neighboring countries, we can say that none of the neighboring countries enjoyed a political stability after independence. Therefore, we think that it's a challenge for independent West Papua region to avoid the similar problems that is happening, especially considering that in the current situation, they're suffering from the similar symptoms and similar problems that these neighboring countries had suffered for. Not even considering their own context and trying to go more as to why specifically then West Papua is going to go through this problem is especially when we consider the 2001 special autonomy law when it was given by the Indonesian government. What happened was the provincial provincial governor and the indigenous people were granted the priority appointment as a judge and prosecutor, they were having the chance in order to climb up the social ladder. Therefore, in 2005, 35% of the civil service were indigenous Papuan people. Therefore, there was a dramatically increase in the number of government money flowing into West Papua. However, the problem here was, rather than this money actually being used for the Papuan people in order to combat racial discrimination or in order to combat the economic problems that is happening, this was actually used in increasing the local level of corruption. It was used in lobbying for creation of villages. It was using in their own internal way. Therefore, we can reasonably make a conclusion that even if they go for an independent state, they're going for a failed state. Not only for this, but also they're going to have poor government services. Also, if we're going to if we put into the context of Papua New Guinea, when they had lots of resources, revenues, and receiving lots of billions of dollars from Australian aid or whatnot, the per capita income of their own country barely improved in 1975. Not only for this, but if we take more into consideration of what has happened specifically in the Papua country itself, over the last decade, the indigenous Papuan people in the middle class, they benefited from expanding the civil bureaucracy, which means there were an increase in local government funding under the decentralization of the special autonomy law that I mentioned. However, the problem here was that this money was not actually used to protect the vulnerables, but how it was used was the newly empowered Papuan bureaucracy had little ability to dispense this public service to the more vulnerables. Therefore, I think it's reasonable for us to make a conclusion that they're going to be a failed state in which they're not going to be a better off situation in order to protect their vulnerables, but the new empowered political power, new empowered states within their own government is actually going for corruption or actually going to use and abuse the money, which is going to actually lead to a moment where more marginalization is going to happen. Let's say not even if this is not the case, why is this more inefficient? In the second level of the analysis, we think that the discrimination is going to get worse under their side of the house. Why is this so? Please take into consideration of the context that in Papua, it's not only Papuan people who are living, but more than half are actually Indonesian migrants who are living there. Therefore, even if we give a separate state, there's no guarantee that the Indonesian people are just suddenly going to move out. Therefore, even if it's going to be in a context where both are going to coexist in the same situation, we highly believe that the discrimination is going to be increasing in the very end of the day. Why is this so? Even if we take into the context of the first ignition of why this Papua independence thing happened, it happened in Surabaya, which was not even West Papua. It was not even Papua, but rather it was inside Indonesia. What this also means is there are other people, there are also Papuan people who are living in Indonesia, other countries, the university students who want to climb up the social ladder, or the people living in Indonesia. However, if we give the separate state to them, then it directly gives out a message that Indonesian government itself doesn't like the Papuan people, therefore racial discrimination, hatred is going to increase. What this is going to directly impact is the Papuan people that they really want to protect in the very end of the day. Therefore, if you want to take into the actual context of the Papuan activists, they are the ones who should really think about and who should really try to increase the access to more of the government platforms or trying to combat racial discrimination in the very end. We think that rather in the current situation, if we just extremely give them the separate state, that's actually going to lead to more racial discrimination, more marginalization of the Papuan people in the very end. We do not think Papuan activists who are wanting to improve this situation are not the right actors in today's debate. Please take into consideration that the Papua independence protest is being a very much of a severe situation in which none of us actually know the urgency. In this situation, if it goes into the actors of Papuan activists, we really think that they should be the ones who should combat racial discrimination in order to live a better world. We want to live in a world where everyone's happy. This is why I'm very proud to propose.
Hey, close the door. Oh yeah, someone else. Okay, thanks. You're welcome. think that opening government cannot just enter this debate by saying that, and in the end, if Papuan activists goes with the separatism agenda, I don't think that the result of post-separatism Papua is going to be good. But they have to also argue on the likelihood that in their side of the house, they're going to be able to create, benevolent policies coming from the Indonesian government in and of itself. This is how OO is going to enter this debate. I'm going to tell you exactly where it is very unlikely that the Indonesian government is going to be able to be true to their word and be nice to the Papuans in and of itself, considering the context of years and years of structural discrimination that has already happened, right? Look, let's take a look at the context that opening government gives us, right? I think in their side of the house, they're going to make Papuan activists, be able to, push for policy change, or at the very least, the alternative that happens in opening government is that Papuan activists have to be able to push for policy change, or either they have to be able to provide, safe havens for Papuan people with their own money and with their own capital, right? I think that these two things is very unlikely, right? On the idea of providing for Papuan people with their own capital, I think that this is very unlikely, right? Because understand that these Papuan activists are also people who are already being oppressed in the current status quo, right? These are the people who doesn't get their resource allocation in the right time in Indonesia. I don't think capital is something that they have. I don't think that they have the capability to create the safe havens for Papua in Indonesia, right? I think that right now, several debaters for opening government, right? Opening government tells you that, right now I don't think Papua is going to be able to be a good country because officials in Papua are already corrupted. Understand that the sole reason why the officials in Papua are corrupted is exactly because they do not have their own land and their own country in Indonesia, right? Because right now, the way that officials in Papua rise into power is exactly by creating coalition with the Japanese government, right? I think that this kind of political structure is going to exist right now and forever, exactly because they do not have the incentive structure to not do this political climate at the end of the day, right? But second, they tell you that most likely they're going to be a failed state because they do not have enough resources and not going to be able to protect their own vulnerable people, right? Let's first take a look at the context of why these people are vulnerable in the first place, and I'm going to debunk why it is untrue in their side of the house, right? Look, the reason why Papuan people are being vulnerable and are being looked down and is exactly asking for independence right now is exactly because of the years of structural discrimination that happens in their side of the house, ladies and gentlemen, right? Exactly because these people are being vulnerable. I think that the way that states can be able to cater to the needs of these people is not through a lot of resource allocation, for example, or like a lot of infrastructure development. What they need is just to have a government that is good to their own people and have to be able to create a policy that doesn't necessarily discriminate these people in the first place, right? So I don't think it's going to be that hard in our side of the house for us to be able to protect these vulnerable people that opening government tells you in their side of the house, right? Thirdly is this: they say that they're going to the discrimination and coexistence are going to be able to happen because in our side of the house there's Indonesian living in Papua and vice versa, right? I think in the context of Indonesian living in Papua, these are most likely the minority in Indonesia, right? But Papuan people are the majority in this land in Indonesia. I don't think that the discrimination is going to be that harmful. I think at best it's going to be marginal, right? But second thing is this: I think if we talk about Papuan people who currently lives in Indonesia, I think that these people are already rich people who already have a coalition with the Indonesian government in Indonesia, right? These are people who already have capital and already have privilege. I don't think these are the vulnerable people that we need to talk about in the current status quo, ladies and gentlemen, right? So what am I going to tell you in my speech, right? First, I'm going to tell you why it is very unlikely for the Indonesian government to be benevolent towards the Papuan. Second, I'm going to tell you what, because this debate is as Papuan activists, I think that the team that can win in this debate is the one that can tell you what are the exact interests of Papuan activists in and on itself, ladies and gentlemen. And that is exactly what I'm going to do in my speech. And thirdly, the likelihood of post-separatism, where it's going to be okay in our side of the house. Ladies and gentlemen, right? So first things first, I think if we talk about Indonesia, where it's very unlikely for this government to become nice and benevolent towards Papua, is exactly because right now Indonesians are clouded with tons of projects, right? A lot of people are asking for a reformation in the political structure, right? We have the rise of a lot of new issues like moving the capital to somewhere else that's not Jakarta, for example, right? We have our government whose current tendency is exactly to forgive and forget, right? Exactly, this is the most important context, right? Our Indonesian own president has already said that, in order for us to be able to create betterment life for Papua is exactly to forgive and forget. What does this tell you? This tells you that even our president is inherently someone that tries to dismiss the idea of structural discrimination as opposed to trying to change it. I don't think that it is very likely that this government is going to be able to be benevolent in that side of the house, ladies and gentlemen, right? So, why do we think that the interest of Papuan activists is not create policy change and stuff like that in our side of the house, right? Look, let's take a look at the context of who these Papuan activists really are, right? These Papuan activists are either the people who were there when Papua is first established as a part of Indonesia, or they are the people who are the sons or the generations after these people has already left in an established settlement. So what does this tell you? This tells you that this interest of these people is inherently to right the history that is already done wrong. Well, you have to consider right now, ladies and gentlemen, that the principle of why Papua was first established as a part of Indonesia is something that is not their consent in and on itself, and it's something that is unjust, right? Let me tell you why. First reason, right? I think that the Indonesians referendum of Papua were heavily militarized, right? These people are inherently oppressed. These people are inherently made to make the right decision in and on itself, right? But second, it is also unjust because of 100,000 people that were Papuan, there only like 1,206 was picked to choose to be available at the referendum in Indonesia, right? So it tells you that these people are the ones that are aware of the structural discrimination and how unjust the Papua was established in Indonesia, right? But I think the second reason is this. I think that the injustices of the Indonesian government cannot be solved and fixed only by structural reform in that side of the house, right? Because I think that the injustice of the Indonesian government has already deprived Papuan people of the right to their own resources, right? I don't think sudden reformation and structural reform of giving them like highways in the current status quo is going to be able to fix their past mistakes in and of itself, ladies and gentlemen, right? But second, I think if you have to argue in the likelihood of why separatism is going to be a likely agenda, within that right now, right now Papuan people already has the momentum of backup from another Melanesian country. Even if they don't, they're going to have a lot of backup from international community, because not only our international community are very aware of human rights violation, but also international community can only interfere in the Papuan ordeal when these people are willingly saying that, oh, I want to separate from the Indonesian government. Because right now, if they don't say that, international community are unlikely to interfere because they're going to be seen as a breach of violation of sovereignty, for example, ladies and gentlemen. So I think that in the case of the likelihood of separatism, a lot of countries are already backing up Papua. Countries like Australia and even to some extent the USA. I don't think the post-separatism agenda is going to be that bad. We're more than proud to oppose.
Did you ask permission?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, but you can ask.
Can I start? Honorable Speaker, I think as a Papuan activist, the way to try to tackle racial tensions that exist between Indonesia and West Papua is not to permanently enshrine and justify by the demarcations and say that now you are a separate state, but to try to work within the system, right? And try to gain the benefits that Papua and try to make the benefits remain that Papua can gain by remaining within Indonesia. And that was particularly OG's stance here. We think that when you are separate, when Papua gains shoots for independence, there are massive benefits that they would lose out by being within Indonesia. And that's the things I think OO is disregarding in this particular respect. Right? What am I going to do to you today? Two things in this speech. Three things in this speech. Firstly, I'll tackle down the principles that they bring out. Secondly, let's talk about life within the independent state of Papua. Thirdly, let's talk about life within Indonesia. Okay? first things first, the principle. The principle that comes out from OO is that historically, no thank you, the Papuans have been oppressed, and like, you know, they haven't really got they haven't really gotten self-determination because it wasn't necessarily their say, right? What is our response to this? We tell you that sure, we agree that that was bad, but I think the better way for us to go as Papuan activists is if you're able to garner a lot of the benefits that comes from being within Indonesia, that is enough. And also, if you're able to prove to you that by you being independent, by Papua being an independent state, if you are significantly worse off, to the extent of which you go into a failed state, that is not the proportional redress that you guys are looking for, right? We think you have to try to maximize the benefits that the Papuans can get. We think our side protects the our side does the work justice, right? Okay. Secondly, let's talk about life within the independent state of Papua. Because I think this debate is not necessarily about just listing out a bunch of reasons as to why Papua has been discriminated and Papua, like you as a Papuan, is bad, and in Indonesia. If that were the case, I think, you know, we have no chance. But we think that there are nuances in which that they miss out here. Because we tell you specifically that it's not just the Papuans who live in Papua. It's not just the Indonesians who live in Indonesia, right? These are interchangeable. That's to say there are significant portions of Indonesians who live in Papua, significant portions of Papuan who live in Indonesia. Why does this particularly matter? Let's talk about Papua first. But first things first, let's talk about the failed state. Because we tell you that there are multiple reasons as to why we give you multiple reasons as to why you should believe that independent Papua would be a failed state. What were those reasons? Firstly, we told you the geographical similarities between, we point out to you the similar situations that happened historically in places like East Timor and places like the Solomon Islands, right? These areas and regions specifically asked for independence and they got their independence, right? We think that we see historically that these countries and these regions have become one of the most poorest regions in Southeast Asia, right? We don't want Papua to go down the same hill, right? Secondly, we told you that, and I'm going to add to you, that if you look what's happening in the status quo and how the Papuans are living in the status quo, a lot of the resources and a lot of the infrastructure that's being built within Papua comes from the funding from the Indonesian government, right? That's to say, we think that comes directly from the Indonesian government. So what these things include things like hospitals, things like schools, things like education. The moment in which you claim for independence, these are massive benefits that you will be losing out in this particular state. No, thank you. Thirdly, we told you about resources. West Papua has a lot of resources, right? I think we all know that. The problem here is that they aren't the ones who are extracting them by themselves, right? They rely specifically on Indonesia to try to extract these particular resources. The moment in which you kick these people out, kick Indonesians out, I think it becomes significantly harder for them to extract these resources, meaning that they'll probably fall down into a significantly worse state, right? Thirdly, we'll tell you about, so thirdly, let's talk about life within Indonesia, right? So we think that we told you specifically because there are countries because there are significant portions of mixed population in both sides of the house. We think that it's probably going to be worse off, given that we tell you that racism in both areas would be significantly worse off, right? Why is this the case? This is because we think that now you give a government justified rhetoric to say that you guys are different, right? You guys are different, and you guys, we don't want to deal with you anymore, so we'll put you into a separate place. You guys get your own independence. But secondly, you also reduce significant amount of contact within these particular people, meaning that you don't get to have the amount of discourse that you could have had under our side of the house, right? Therefore, I think these are reasons as to why we give you discrimination was significantly worse off. Given that there are still people who live within Indonesia who are Papuan, we think that it's going to be significantly worse off for those particular people. Because the racism and the hatred is going on. It also works vice versa with the Indonesian people the Papuan people living in Papuan. They probably get discriminated by the Indonesians who live significantly there. And they say that, the Indonesians who live there significantly are a significant minority. That's not necessarily the case. When you look at what's going on, when you look at the population of West Papua, you see the amount of Indonesians increasing year by year, day by day, right? If you look at the World Report, I think it was like a UN report, they project in about 2030 to be the for like the population of Indonesians to double by 2030, right? Therefore, I think that's still a significant portion of people that you have to defend that I think OO hasn't done yet, right? Thirdly, they push us the burden about say that how can this fulfillment of social and economic rights happen? We think that these can happen for two specific reasons, right? Firstly, we think now there is a justification for the Papuans and the Indonesian government to say that we will provide you these rights. Why is this the case? Because I think OO specifically tells you that the reason why there is racism right now, the reason why the Papuans are claiming for independence is because of the significant amount of racism that's been going on right now. Note that Indonesia necessarily wants Papua because of the amount of resources that's in there. Therefore, we think that once Papua claims that, we will not claim for independence as long as you reduce the amount of racism and hatred towards us. We think that is a significantly good reason for Indonesians to say that, okay, we will reduce racism, but we will try to use the amount of resources that's there, right? Secondly, we think that the problem can be solved right now because we think that the Papuans should probably be a little bit less violent, given that damages their chance of international support that they gain from the side, right? They say that OO says that the Indonesia is burdened with other projects. We think that amount of resources that you can claim from here is the amount of resources that you can spend on those particular projects. Very proud to.
Thank you for the speech by the Deputy Leader.
Government of Indonesia is that benevolent, then they already give the full autonomy of well-being or even their own freedom since 1960s, where Papuans have already sought through pacifist actions. To the fact they already done until this far, meaning freedom have never been sought inside of Papuans Island, where it is their own land and they have the right to actually, enjoy their own resources and also their freedom in politics and whatnot. Because in their side of the house, freedom of expressions will going to be restricted, exactly, because that is a post-separatism movement. That's why it's going to be bad. I'm going to explain to you two things: how being independent is the best way for Papuans' well-being, and second of all, let's just deal with the discriminations. Now, rebuttal will be intertwined. Now, I'll state to you how I'm going to explain to you how being independent is the best way for Papuans' well-being. The only harms being imposed to us is that there will be a failed state because the officials are corrupted and doesn't have enough resource. Exactly. Those cases are because we're still in line with Indonesia and we never had our fully independence to control our economy and also our resource and politicals and whatnot. The reason why Papua doesn't have enough resource is because first, West Papuan resources are controlled by central government. All the deals created by multinationals company, always being directed towards the central government, which it needs the agreement of the presidents in and on itself. The distributions of resources were never being fair because it always being centralized on Java or even their own major needs. For example, moving their own capitals and whatnot. Understanding that context, those kind of benefits will, in their side, those kind of benefits will not going to be defined because of the divided of resource. Two, and second of all, you cannot rely on the benevolence of governments because you need to understand the context of Jokowi stance on oppositions right now. He tries to slam down his opposition that is not in line with their ideology. Example given by imprisoning pro-independence Papua for participating in protests since 1960s. Now, even now, Jokowi has been imprisoning several religious leaders in Indonesia. What does this prove to you? This proves to you that you cannot rely on the benevolence of the government, because the benevolence of government that's out of the house, if you take their best case, it's only a tokenistic benevolence in order for them to have a stability. Best scenario, Papua will stop the tensions, understand the state want to establish, they will eventually imprison the Papuan activists, right? Because they don't want another kind of movement happens in the future, understanding that right now Indonesia have a lot of projects going on, meaning they want stability and they want to slam down this kind of stability for the sake of stability. This and also they have stated, how about political freedoms? These officials are corrupted. They're likely to have good stakes and whatnot. Look, these officials cannot be seen as a Papuan activist because they have a collide, and now we can even imprison those corruptors with our own constitution. Because in our side of the house, exactly, these people who are bad, these officials who are bad, cannot be imprisoned because he's the one who could take control inside of the Papuan politics in and on itself. That is why this is something that is real bad, because the world that we envision inside of oppositions, we're going to have our own constituents, and also we also have our leader, which already exists inside of OPM, or Organisasi Papua Merdeka, for its own independence. We think we're ready, but maybe they're trying later. They're bringing up the parallel example of East Timor. Look, this is a different context because East Timor doesn't have enough resources like West Papua. Now, in our side, the moment when we have enough resources, we can take control of Freeport if that is necessary. I think that is something that is important. And second of all, East Timor are controlled by Portuguese, but now we already have OPM, which is a literally different context, right? Because we already readied our own governances in the end of the day. But even if Papua people cannot extract their resource, we think that it's okay if that's the very worst scenario we need to take. Because Papua doesn't like lavish life. They don't have the access to internet for years. They're being treated as that. Their house are traditions and whatnot. I think that what they need right now is the freedom for not being discriminated, which is absent in their side of the house.
Yeah.
Money is never their interest. What they want is all about freedom, which is why their interest is just have an established government. But let's just wrap that out, because most likely Papua also needs money and resources. But before I'm going, yes.
So if it's true that Jokowi is too violent to the extent that he jails, people who want Papuan independence, why should you as an activist claim for that independence? Because you know that you're probably not going to get it.
We're going to be succeeded, because why? We already have a backup from several countries, or even the moment when we continuously have our radicals, most likely we will have more support, because understanding that is really crucial in the end of the day, right? The reason why it's not crucial is exactly because we still align with the government side of the house. Our media is blocked, but now when we make this something that's really urgent, most likely it's going to blow out in international societies and whatnot. But let's just deal with the discrimination that they're stating to you. First, I don't think there will be a discriminations, because now if there's a discriminations, we can punish them because we have our own constituents, right? If there's discriminations until the extent of human violations of Indonesians versus Papua, then that is a crime inside of international constituents, right? That's actually something that, as Papuan, as a new state, we don't want to do it. That's why, in order for us to grab more diplomacy, we won't likely to do any kind of radical discrimination towards these people, because we want to make our diplomacy better in other countries, especially when you already, but it's going to be bad in our side of the house, especially when you already have those riots in some area in Indonesia. Discriminations will be even worse right now the moment you stick in their side of the house, because you're going to be seen as savage, or even someone who doesn't even want to collide with Indonesians, right? Because you're different in terms of history, race, and whatnot. Because this is the kind of things why in the clash of discrimination, we think that it is very in our side of the house, because right now West Papua will be a safe space for its own people without any interventions coming from Indonesian government, because that is not, because in a status quo it's not something that we actually acquired exactly because of the interventions from governments of Indonesia. That's why in the case of well-being, I think it's better in our side of the house, because now we control the MNC that comes, or even we can take the benefits out from it. Our people will be employed rather than Indonesian people in status quo. And second of all, we're going to have our own constituents where we will eventually punish people who are corrupted, or even people who are bad in the end of the day. That's why vote for opposition for finance.
Nak deg-degan je.
I think opening opposition fails in this debate because they never characterize how Indonesia will react, ladies and gentlemen. Because most likely, the moment you're going to be that extreme, Indonesia are going to attack you and never accept this offer because Papua is very important. You have gold mines there and so many rich resources there, ladies and gentlemen. So I think the comparative is extremely missed by team opening opposition. How closing government extend this debate? A, we're going to give you the comparative and why focusing on fulfillment rights is going to be effective. Because somehow opening government missed this comparative. But secondly, we are also going to explain the important actors in this debate, which is the Papuans that are spread all over in Indonesia, in Surabaya, in Jawa, and other things are going to be harmed because you're going to be seen as extreme, and Indonesian people are going to discriminate you even more, ladies and gentlemen. So this is the different from opening government case because you're only talking about Indonesia in Java, which in Papua, which is very minority, ladies and gentlemen. One direct rebuttal. One is that biggest argumentation of team opening opposition is their best case scenario is getting freedom. But only one analysis why it's likely to happen. Having Melanesian group to help them, ladies and gentlemen. 3 reasons why this is unlikely to be effective. A, because you are seen as a terrorist organization, ladies and gentlemen. So more likely, international societies are not going to help you because you are seen as violent, especially in the current status quo. Papuan separatist movement are burning governmental buildings in Papua, ladies and gentlemen, burning people and actually attacking people in the streets, ladies and gentlemen. So less likely, international society are going to help you because you are very violent in your protest. But secondly, notice their own example, Melanesian group, ladies and gentlemen, are very closely affiliated towards the Indonesian government. So I think the most factual argumentation is they are going to affiliate towards the government system, not a terrorist organization. But thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, they dismiss that Indonesia actually have guns and actually have military, ladies and gentlemen. So more likely, when you're trying to separate, they are going to attack you and not going to make you have any capability to actually gain traction in gaining that independent state, ladies and gentlemen. So this misanalysis from team opening opposition makes it that their benefit of freedom are not going to mechanize because no explanation at all on why this is effective to begin with. But secondly, even if we take the best case scenario that somehow Papuan can be free and make their own governmental system, 2 reasons why it's going to be still bad. A, they have no money. In the current status quo, all of the developmental programs that goes into Papuas are coming from Indonesia, gentlemen. All the highways, all the governmental buildings are built by the Indonesians initiative, especially in Jokowi's term right now, for a more unified and more developmental Indonesia, gentlemen. Right now, Jokowi are building highways in rural areas, in all of the islands that have never been touched in the past, ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, notice that their ability to use the resources. This is the DLO argumentation, that they have rich resources. Notice that their only capability to use that resources is to have technologies, to have the capabilities of corporations that right now are very highly affiliated towards Indonesia. The moment you take Freeport from Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen, USA are not going to give the technologies towards these kinds of terrorist organizations, ladies and gentlemen. So on all instances, your freedom and your capability to gain betterment of the people are not going to happen out of this debate. 2 argumentation in my debate speech, ladies and gentlemen. One, why pursuing the Papuan separatist agenda are impossible, and secondly, on the comparative, why our status quo alternative are much more progressive, and thirdly, why it hurts Papuan in all Indonesian areas, ladies and gentlemen. I think there are 2 main reasons why right now separatism are impossible. One, because Papua is very important for Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen. You have Freeport, you have rich resources. So most likely, the moment you want to take that away by being separated, Indonesia are not going to back down. They will try to retaliate. They will do all of their efforts to defend and make this not happen, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that you have so many military aggression to ensure that OPM never succeed, ladies and gentlemen, shows to you how dangerous this is. But secondly, notice, ladies and gentlemen, why being separatist, why being violent are going to be not effective, because you are seen going to be violent by all Indonesian people. This already happened in the current status quo, where most Indonesian are actually saying that these kinds of terrorist organization, are actually not effective and are actually not good for you to actually support, because you are burning governmental buildings and you are actually gaining no significant effort in the current status quo. But moreover, I think right now it's more going to be harmful, because notice the characterization of Indonesia and how they present information. So you're going to make the tagline that separatism is actually terrorism, is actually harmful, thus going to amplify the narratives that this is actually very harmful for you and very bad for you to use these narratives. So the harm in their side, ladies and gentlemen, are two main things. A, Indonesians' retaliation, and secondly, no grassroots supports, because you are seen as very violent, thus making no capabilities for you to gain traction to make the difference in your side, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, the comparative. While in comparison, economical rights in our side are going to be much progressive. In three main ideas. A, notice that in the current status quo, progressive support by people are actually to counter racism are actually progressive. In the current status quo, we see in social medias where Indonesian people are saying, don't be racist towards these kinds of individuals, because they are seeing that these individuals are being suffered. But in comparison, where they see these Papuans are actually going to be much more aggressive, they are going to say, maybe my support should not go there, because they are not the people that I want to protect, because they are actually killing and burning people in the streets, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, notice that in the current status quo, ladies and gentlemen, the allocation of budget in Papua is increasing. Notice that Jokowi's administration plan is actually to have a more rural development programs in all over Indonesia, ladies and gentlemen. So most likely they allocate more money in these kinds of developmental programs that hardly happens in the current status quo, ladies and gentlemen. So the comparative is these kinds of things are going to lose support, because you are going to be seen as violent, thus not getting this kind of progressivity anymore, ladies and gentlemen. But thirdly, the most important argument in this debate, ladies and gentlemen, why even if in their side, when you succeed, you're going to harm all Papuans in all over Indonesia. Notice the interest of Papuan activists, ladies and gentlemen, are not only Papuans in Papua, but Papuans that are spread in all over Indonesia, which is a tons of people, ladies and gentlemen. So most likely, when you are being racist and separatist towards these kinds of individuals, most likely, these kinds of individuals that have set up homes in Jawa, ladies and gentlemen, set up homes in Kalimantan, ladies and gentlemen, are going to be discriminated, because they are seen as outsiders. They are seen as people that are terrorists and have coming from features that are actually not Indonesian, ladies and gentlemen. So I think even in their best case scenarios, you harm all Papuan people in Indonesia, thus making hard for you to gain support. Sini are the only team in this debate that proves to you the comparative, why in best case scenario still harmful in our side, and secondly we prove to you the likelihood of why this one going to be succeed for team closing government. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech, member of
Members of the House, we reject the imperialist premise brought up by the government side of the House that a functional Papua can only exist when you have functional state institutions as conceptualized by the West and as appointed by Indonesia. We think, by and large, Papua is a structurally different territory that would actually be harmed from intensifying of central authority, and we say that it is far better for us to try to achieve independence and live the only way we know how. We think that Papua is made of many tribal councils, for example, whose sensitivities cannot be catered to by an Indonesian-backed government. It must be authentically Papuan in nature that understands these particular sensitivities, but more importantly also has to feel like the Papuan people are being represented by this particular council, and we say that that's what's important, and we think that the YCO will take this debate. Because what you need to understand is that the Papuan people are structurally locked out in the status quo from the very central authority if they want to champion their side of the house. Because firstly, they are inherently hostile already towards the Indonesian government, who has already given them so much suffering in the past, for example, and we think that the vast majority of of Papuans do not want to grant more legitimacy towards that structure. But secondly, I think that even if they're willing to cooperate, they're not used, ladies and gentlemen, to the representative democracy structure that Indonesia is currently trying to push within these particular territories. They're more used to direct democracy of tribal councils, for example, and these are the kinds of structures that are not going to be able to work for the Papuans on their side of the house. That's why under their best case scenario of increased rights, representation is actually a harm for the vast majority of Papuans, because you only enfranchise urban and privileged Papuans, ladies and gentlemen, who are a minority within that particular area. Without regard to tribal Papua and the indigenous people, and Indonesia is still legitimate in saying that, oh, this is what the Papuan people as a whole wanted, because that is what the conventions of like international politics would dictate for them, right? We think that what we want to do under closing opposition is to back the platform of individuals like Benny Wenda, for example, an activist in Papua who recognizes the structure of Papuan society and wants to fight for a government that is able to recognize that and can establish a government that caters to that at the end of the day, right? Let's take OO out of this debate, right? So OO did a very good job outlining a robust negative case, but note that in so doing, they felt their own central burdens, right? They never told you first why the fight for independence is very likely to succeed, for example. Within that, secondly, they never told you why independence is going to be good for the Papuan itself. We're going to prove this in direct contention of OG's claim of a failed state, for example. But thirdly, we think that they also never engaged the worst case scenario that independence is not achieved, why it's still better for the Papuans at the end of the day. We think that we're going to cater to that. So firstly, the first contribution of closing opposition. Why the fight for Papuan independence is possible, right? We think that firstly and most crucially, what the analysis are flagging from all things in this debate is that Indonesia is financially very constrained right now. It is incapable of fighting a war of attrition in Papua, which is very likely to happen, right? Because they are up to their necks, for example, in debt, in infrastructure projects that they're trying to build elsewhere, for example, and trying to like build like an industrial 4.0, for example, within the urban areas. We think that's a lot of investment they're doling out, and they cannot fund a war at this particular matter, at this particular juncture, right? But furthermore, with that warfare in Papua land is intrinsically very expensive, ladies and gentlemen, because there's a vast amount of territory that you have to cover in order for you to assert as a legitimate authority over that particular land, for example, and it's very susceptible to a lot of methods that the Papuan people can employ in order to delegitimize your authority, right? Like hit and run attacks on certain military barracks, for example, on government institutions, like guerrilla warfare within the territories that they control. This is especially harmful for Indonesia, for example, because Papua know better the lay of the land, right? Then they're very familiarized with how to fight a guerrilla warfare in the territory that they know best, right? We think that it is intrinsically very expensive and not realistic for Indonesia to fight that war, right? But secondly, we think that Papua retainment is also a net loss for the Indonesian treasury as we speak right now, right? Because Freeport-McMoRan, for example, is generating a loss in profits right now for the Indonesian government because control was recently taken from the Western owners and a lot of necessary investment was pulled out, right? That means that even if you're able to retain Papuan land, that's still not likely to manifest into benefits for the Indonesian government, and we think that it's very unlikely that they will resist sufficiently towards that particular effort, right? But the second reason is also because we have a lot of momentum right now, ladies and gentlemen. It's to say a lot of aggression that happened in recent times, like the suppression of civilians and students, for example, are particularly inflaming the narrative that Indonesian government is impossible to negotiate with, and it's also inflaming the violent resistance that currently exists within Papua, and we say that we need to capitalize upon that, right? Rather than betraying the will of the people. But the second, our contribution, right? What happens post-independence? Look, we think the crucial problem in status quo is that the sheer amount of resource extraction that happens within Papua is actually harming the indigenous lifestyle of the people that's within it, right? When you have like a lot of pollution coming out of the Freeport mines, for example, it's polluting the rivers, it's polluting the forest, for example, it's harming the only way of life that these people actually know, right? So we don't think that government can just wash away the necessary consequence that resource extraction will intensify on their side of the house, and we think that that's destructive to the Papuan lifestyle, and it's not within the best interest of the Papuans at the end of the day, right? We think that when the government is sensitive to Papuan demands and what the Papuan people actually need, like how CEO will tell you, they're going to de-escalate the kinds of resource extraction that's very destructive in the status quo, right? They're going to choose better contractors, for example, or they're going to limit the scale of exploitation to better benefit the Papuans at the end of the day. Why then is that existence better? Because first, you still get the bare minimum of infrastructure and influx of money that needs to be met, right? Because you still can take advantage of the existing infrastructure that already has been built, like Jokowi's piecemeal infrastructure that they gave to Papua, for example. The infrastructure left behind by Freeport-McMoRan, and we think that they are still capable of extracting some degree of resource if financial capability is still a big concern their side of the house, right? But secondly, we think that they are also able to trade in a peaceful coexistence with the Austronesian League, for example. If they need to sustain their particular young nation in this very tremulous era, we think that they can rely on other actors rather than what they claim are their side of the house, right? But thirdly, even if we fail to separate, why is it still better on our side of the house?
we think that the goals of team government of heightened rights is more likely to be achieved under us. Why is that so? Because we think that you need to present a real threat of separatism, because it's the only thing that Indonesia has shown a propensity to respond to in the status quo, right? Because, for example, Indonesia is unlikely to respond to like sympathetic demands of like Papuans, for example, because they are currently being controlled by Islamic nationalists, for example, when the vast majority of Papuans are actually religious minorities. We think that also they are habituated to seeing Papuans suffer already in status quo, and they're desensitized to the graphic imagery that we're likely to push out in order to garner their sympathy at the end of the day, right? We think that in order for us to gain any sort of benefit, we have to play to their particular fears of losing the profits that government claims exist within Papua, and that's the only way that the Indonesian government is going to make any sort of concessions towards the Papuan people at the end of the day. That is what happened, ladies and gentlemen, with Nangro Aceh Darussalam, for example, another region in Indonesia, for example, that garnered like an autonomy in order to practice Sharia law because they presented a real threat of separatism. We think that any other form of advocacy is not going to be responded well to by the Indonesian government. That's why they're going to fail earlier attempts. Very practical.
Then if you give a speech, joined by the draft.
The reason why this kind of problem is bigger and even more bigger, not because those kinds of systematic oppression that what the opposition tried to explain, or even the discrimination towards to these Papuans and so on and so forth. Because we say that the Papuan activists focusing to discuss about how the failure of Indonesian government will try to maximize the resources and even to maximize the progress that happened in status quo, and appreciate the government that what they already contribute to the Papuans at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. In Jokowi presidential already shows to us on how Indonesia are trying fully to initiate the support to Papuans in many kind of sectors, ladies and gentlemen. What my first speaker already explained, right? Lots of policies or referendum and autonomous region also created to give more contribution in Papua, not only to support their economical stability, but on how even the society in status quo already prove how the society already support the social interaction between the Papuans and towards the Indonesian people at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. That is why all their argument that trying to justify this kind of thing shouldn't be count at the very first beginning. But before that, let's engage the closing opposition cases, right? When they're trying to explain about how this is about how the government in Indonesia already locked these kinds of Papuans. Ladies and gentlemen, first response, we say that do not count this point because the fact in status quo, the discussion in the government or even in the discussion between the legislative also focus to discuss how the prosperity of Papuans should be improved at the end of the day. But secondly, even though they explain that the Papuans are very different in significance such as their identity, area, distinction, and so on and so forth, we say that that is not the big cases that we have to count, ladies and gentlemen. Because in Indonesia, Indonesia is not that so evil. There are a lot of provinces that also have a special treatment with Papua, ladies and gentlemen. Example, just like in Yogyakarta, Aceh, for example, that also already create such a special region that we think this is more strategic rather than we create the independent to Papuans at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. That is why their idea of a lock by the government is not really exclusive to this debate. But secondly, on how they trying to explain about how in status quo Indonesia limit in financial to support Papuans. Ladies and gentlemen, it is even harmful in their side of the house because in their best scenario, Indonesia would going to get many support by international community, ladies and gentlemen. Like Indonesia and Papua have to compete to gain more support by international community to get more to get more income and so on and so forth. And we think that is not strategic to begin with because Papua should sacrifice many things and also should start from the zero, ladies and gentlemen. That is why sacrifice sacrifices many things to Papuans is not solve any kinds of issues that they are trying to win in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, even though this failed in our side, even though they say that even if that it is failed, it's okay to starting the war. We say that it is harmful to Papuans, ladies and gentlemen, because the technology in Indonesia is already more bigger rather than in Papua. But even though they are trying to win this debate by saying that it's okay to start a debate in the forest, ladies and gentlemen, even Indonesia military also already have those kinds of technology, ladies and gentlemen. That is why even the Air Force, for example, could win by Indonesian military, ladies and gentlemen. That is why their power is not enough to cater all of the scenario that they want to win in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. And also, they're trying to explain about how the power of Papua is already enough, ladies and gentlemen. The problem in this debate, there are not of team that understand what happened in Papua in status quo, right? Because even in Papua, right, also have a separatist movement, ladies and gentlemen. Also, there are a lot of Papuans that reject these kinds of movement, ladies and gentlemen, reject these kinds of activists because they created chaos, ladies and gentlemen. They propaganda to the society and even want to take the land and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, it is less likely to happen. Why? Because the effort to unify, it's hard in their side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. As I said before, the separatist movement would even understand what is exactly the problem. But secondly, they should build so many things. That is why I told you that these kinds of things would it even hurt in their side of the house because Papuans should find a lot of things such as power in military, but also should find an investor by industry and also how to gaining more power by the society that even hard in their side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. That is why argument about how the power of Papua is already enough shouldn't be counted until the end of this debate, ladies and gentlemen. So first is so let's engage to the whole of debate, right? They're trying to the opening batch trying to explain about how this is about structural discrimination. No, thank you. Structural discrimination and so on and so forth. My first speaker already explained on how the discrimination would happen in both sides. In their best scenario, these Papuan activists would successful to create a better home to Papuans. But we still asking the likelihood and the process on how in their side would achieve this kind of situation. Even if they explain about how they could cater the international support, what kind of international support that they want to achieve, and also there is no process of unification that they try to explain because it is even hard in the side of the house because the society in Indonesia and Papuans already mingle to each other in status quo, ladies and gentlemen. It's even worse in their side of the house. No, thank you. Because first, it is forced the Papuans to unify their territory, unify their society, and so on and so forth. Meaning that they should sacrifice so many things, leaving their school, leaving their family, leaving their job. Then we think it is unstrategic to begin with. But secondly, there is no such explanation by the opposition side. The process on how the discrimination would even disappear in the side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. Comparative, at least in our side of the house, the society already be progressive. My first speaker already explained not only emotional support that they gained by the society, but also on how institutional support also already exists by the government. That is why we say that idea of supporting system is better in our side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. So comparatively, what happened to this debate, right? The opposition tried to explain about how they want to empower the Papuan activists to fulfill the separatist process and let Papuans to enjoy their own resources. Comparative in our side, we want to stay in Indonesia, start to more progressive discussion and focus to the right of Papuans. So how close the government break the deadlock, right? First thing, we prove to you how the likelihood on their side of the house, they are not really explained to us how the process that Papuans are ready for their independence. But secondly, on the point of sustainability, in their side, Papuans were starting from the zero. It's funny when they say that they would take over Freeport because my first speaker already explained the contract for Freeport is happening between USA and Indonesia, not USA with Papuans, ladies and gentlemen. That's why vote for the closing government.
The mistake of most teams in this debate is that they ran a negative case
without telling you whether the strategy that they opt to use is going to work with the Indonesian government, right? What they always told you is to say that, oh, if we fight for independence, the reaction is going to be very violent. But they never told you why fighting for only a battle against racism or for economic justice will work against the Indonesian government, especially when we face a government that has already, as they say, cut off the internet and cut off any dissent and any sort of protest against the current Indonesian institutions, and does not have any significant Papuan representation inside the parliament. To that extent, we think that the government case have failed in proving why on their side Papuans would get any sort of reparations. I'll talk about two things. Firstly, I'll talk about on which side will Papuans get more genuine self-determination, and secondly, will the country be successful, right? Most of the questions that came from the government team. So firstly, on which side will Papuans get more genuine self-determination? This is an important clash, because if you look at the government's case, it implicitly relies on the existence of check and balance to the bad government that was conceded by all the teams, that is the Indonesian government, right? OG didn't prove this at all. CG also didn't prove this, but their only argumentation was to say that the reaction is going to be so bad that Papuans will just basically die, right? The thing is, firstly, Adam told you that it's before I move on to the responses, Adam told you that it's too hard for there to be any integration because the Papuans themselves are very distrustful towards the government of Indonesia. So it's unlikely, even when the Indonesian government is already being very generous trying to include these people inside their current government, it's unlikely for these Papuans to be able to create any meaningful change given that there's a lot of cultural differences and tribal opposition towards integrating towards the Indonesian government. So it's unlikely that their best case will result in any benefits for Papuans. But we also told you that firstly, we agree that the reaction would probably be really, really bad, that there would be military conflict. But firstly, this is a marginal increase of harms in comparison to the things that the Papuans already experienced, in comparison to tear gas being fired at Papuans' homes for them doing nothing, in comparison to protesters being shot, and in comparison to Gerakan Papua Merdeka already being designated as a terrorist organization, right? So it's unlikely that this will create any change that is much worse for the Papuan government, for the Papuan people. But we told you that on our side, at least there's a high chance of protection to the people that matters, right? Given that we have this momentum that make radical groups such as the Gerakan Papua Merdeka, which is a Papuan militia, to get much more support and much more participants in their fight against the Indonesian government, given that the recent events have proved that diplomatic relationship with Indonesia is impossible, right? But secondly, we proved to you that the Indonesian government can sustain a war of attrition. They have resource scarcity, that they have so much debt in building infrastructure, so they can't spend much more in supplying their military in a fight against a very popular Papuan militia. Secondly, we also told you that Jokowi will face political backlash, given that other projects become much slower because of this, right? This is important first because we prove, this is important first because we prove that we can create independence, given that the military of Indonesia would probably give up. So CG's point about the military of Indonesia being super strong runs smooth if they cannot prove why they will be able to sustain a long conflict with Papua, right? But secondly, the point is also important because at least on our side, we create enough disruption to get a big concession because we present the Indonesian government with a real threat. Remember, this debate is not talking about what the goal should be, right? But this debate is also talking about the strategy in which these activists need to pursue. So we proved to you that this strategy would create enough chaos so that the Indonesian government would give a big concession that is much more meaningful to any sort of fight of social justice or economic justice that would be too peaceful and to be unthreatening, right? On their side, the Indonesian government will only see it as only being a diplomatic annoyance or a civil conflict that is so small that means that the solution on their side would be conflict because that's much easier, right? To just send troops and kill these people to make sure that there's no more protests. That's why we prove to you that our strategy works. And if they cannot prove that their strategy works, that means that benefits and reform on their side are pretty much imaginative. Yes.
then under your side, that Papua will have a separate independent state. And rather than the intuitive good feeling that they gain independence, how can the government practically function?
This clash. Will the country be successful, right? The problem with the proposition team is that they never define the parameter of success. We can tell you that the benefits needs to be enjoyed by Papuans. Either the resources must be given to the Papuans, or that the type of development be a type of development that the Papuans enjoy. Adam told you that the model of development that cannot be Indonesian based, given that there's a distinction between what the Indonesians wants, right, and by what the Papuan wants. Government's response, opposing government, told us that, oh, Papuans already get welfare from the Indonesian government. The thing is, the type of welfare are toll roads and palm oil fields that destroys the tribal relationship towards the land that Papuans care about so much. So Papuans cannot extract any resources from these welfare that Indonesians give to them, right? Moreover, these palm oil fields, these toll roads are not owned by Papuans. It's mostly owned by Javanese oligarchs, right? So it's unlikely that the profits will also be received by Papuans, right? But secondly, the opening government talks about how Papuans are very corrupt, so most likely we cannot give them self-governance, right? Firstly, this is example-based, and they haven't told you why the Papuans have a structural incentive to corrupt all the time, right? The difference is, back then, the government is appointed by Indonesia. They rely on a power dynamic that served Indonesia's government. It's likely if they have the ability to self-determine, they most likely do not corrupt because they are accountable directly to their people. And if you characterize them as being that tribal, literally bad determination means you're killed, right? So it's unlikely that it's going to be super corrupt or anything, right? The last thing that all government teams talk about, CG, basically copying OG's argument, is that, oh, people are going to be discriminated inside Indonesia. This is untrue for two reasons. One, if we get independence, Indonesia's relationship to Papua matters, because Indonesia would probably still want to get the benefits out of the investments that they already give in Papua, right? So most likely they cannot and need to protect a lot of Papuans to maintain a good diplomatic relationship. But secondly, even if we cannot do that, at least we give vulnerable, discriminated people a home to go back to, and it is worth fighting for. We're very proud.